2023 was a blur. It seemed to go by exceptionally quickly. There seemed to be an unlimited amount of change. And in an industry that it seems like every single year there's either changes in paperwork or changes in policy or changes in interest rates and lending requirements and all that kind of stuff. 2023 seems like it just compounded together. And coming out of 2022, we kind of look back at our January 2023 podcast and just the sentiment for consumers. I think naturally early in the year, especially realtors, mortgage brokers tend to have a different perspective on coming into a new year, maybe slightly more pessimistic, but realtors always are very optimistic coming into a new year. It's naturally just kind of like a fresh start. And I think coming into 2023, we had seen a bunch of rate hikes. Prime was at 6.45 coming into 2023. And the consensus throughout the industry was that we're kind of at the top of rates and things are going to turn at some point in the next year or two. But we felt like we were at the top. And so I think in our podcast, we mentioned something like, the tide's turning or, something along those lines.
This is the January 2023 podcast.
Yes.
The last year, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's fun to look back at those prediction style podcasts because it puts in perspective that obviously we're not in control. We do not control what happens with interest rates. We don't control what happens with market values in real estate in Greater Vancouver. But it's kind of fun to predict. But it's also interesting to look back and acknowledge where we may have overlooked things. And I think with inflation numbers the way that they were at the beginning of 2023, I'm looking back, I'm not super surprised that there was a couple more rate hikes, which ultimately slowed market activity quite a bit. So today's episode is just going to kind of recap every little, we're going to miss some because there's so many, but recap changes that happened that affected real estate in Greater Vancouver in 2023. Where do we begin? There's a long list.
I think just as a whole, I think it covered it, but last January, we were optimistic about that year. And there's more changes that we didn't see coming and clearly impacted our optimism around the halfway point.
Yeah.
So, the year finished off, last January, it felt like the November, early December of 2022 was the bottom. And it was coming up. And it did have a little run. And then this fall was kind of a repeat of the previous November, December.
Maybe just to put in perspective how slow sales were as a whole in 2023, share some numbers. So 2022 was a slow year. That's when, it started really busy. We kind of peaked in February, March, and then interest rate hikes started happening and activity slowed significantly. But comparatively to 2022, 2023 was another 10 to 12% lower in sales volume than 2022. And comparatively to 2021, which was a very busy year, 2023 was over 40% sales volume down.
Yeah. We were grateful and lucky to make the top 1% President's Club as a team, but we were shocked more than anything. This year felt like an awful year. Everyone was hungry and anxious to do more. And the fact that we made the top 1% with the way our business went, it was shocking. It just kind of shows how down the industry is. And I feel for the new agents. I feel for the average agent. It's a tough to make a living at this time. Mm-hmm. It's frustrating.
Even as a consumer who pays attention to real estate, who might be listening to this, you look back at the last 10, 15 years in Greater Vancouver, and it's exceptionally rare for there to be two slow real estate years in a row, right? You look all the way back to when you started in 2008, and that was, a lot more doom and gloom globally.
Yeah, this was very different.
And that was a 12-month bounce back to peak market values. And now we've been sluggish, let's say, for just almost 24 months, 21 months, let's say.
Yeah, the big difference is our price points are much higher. So people feel those interest rates a lot more. And the salaries really haven't gone up considerably much since 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
But at that time, the world was falling apart. And it was more in the US. It was falling apart a lot, which we got a lot of their news. So it felt bad. But Vancouver was in its own little bubble and it was a 12-month blip. And this one, I mean, how many months are we? We're well over 12 months now. We're like 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's like, when's it going to turn around? And a lot of people want to move. All this downtime is future uptime. Like there is future transactions that are going to happen because people have been holding off. So there is going to be a wave of high activity that we saw in 2021 for a while. It needs to be more affordable. The rates need to come down to make it more achievable.
The big thing that a lot of consumers are asking us about is when is the market going to climb again? I saw my neighbor sell for this much 2 years ago. When is that number going to come back? And that's such an impossible question to answer. But what we can pretty confidently say going into this year is at some point, activity is going to pick up significantly. And I don't know exactly what the trigger point of that is. We've seen, I believe it's 3 rate holds in a row. And our next one, we're doing this podcast on January 18th. This is going to probably be released before the next Bank of Canada meeting, but the next Bank of Canada meeting is the 24th, next Wednesday. At some point, activity is going to pick up significantly. I don't know if it's going to take one rate drop to see a bunch of buyers come back to the market, but the level of sales volume that happened in 2023 is not going to continue. That's not going to continue long term. We're well below the 10-year average. And more people are moving to Greater Vancouver every year. Last year was last year was like 125 or 150,000 people moving just directly to Greater Vancouver. Sales volume is going to pick up. And then we will definitely do more podcasts on the supply and demand equation because it is out of whack in Greater Vancouver. Just interest rates are kind of holding us in check right now.
It has to pick up. You and I both have a laundry list or a long list of people that want to move. Let's talk about some of the changes that happened last year because there was a lot of change early last year that's kind of hasn't been. Well, I haven't seen many people talking about it much more. But where do we begin, Denny? Do you want to?
Because we're on the topic of interest rates, maybe let's just kind of summarize the way that the year went. So coming into 2023, we had one rate hold, and then it held again in January. And buyer confidence seemed to come back a little bit. Activity picked up for the spring. It was a busier spring than 2022. And house prices actually started to increase again. It was minimal, maybe 5 to 7%, depending on neighborhood and location and product type. But market values definitely started to pick up again comparatively to 2022. Then
the spring we did have a run in spring, and the fixed mortgage rates were lower than they are today. The rates mortgage was cheaper than it was today in spring. And it did feel very optimistic for a period of time then. And then summer hit, and those 2 rate increases happened.
Summer hit, and then there's back-to-back months with another 25 basis point bump. And that just kind of killed consumer sentiment. It killed market activity. The summer was really slow. September, October were maybe the slowest fall I've seen in my career. It was very, very slow fall.
So I should do a correction. I think the first rate hike was in January last year, and then there was one in the summer, if I remember it right. But
there was 2. I believe it was June, July.
Yeah, it went from...
Wasn't it back to back?
We don't have the rate history in front of us, folks. So give us a little bit of leeway if we're off by a bit. But there was definitely one in the summer, and I know there was one, I believe, late January last year. Okay. Yeah. So... where do you want to begin, Denny? The January 1st, aside from the mortgage, the rate cycle, there was some announcements earlier last year that, incentives to help people afford a home. There was the tax-free first-time home savings account that was launched last year, which is basically just as a reminder for people. It's great for first-time buyers, still a program that I highly recommend anyone consider. And it's basically you can do tax-free contributions to an account to help save up for a home. And just to recap, the maximum lifetime contribution you can do is $40,000. The maximum annual is $8,000, and that money can go toward when you find a home, you can pull out those investments and use that money as a down payment. Now, if you don't use it towards a home, you can also move it into an RSP at no cost, freely. So, first-time buyer tip: take advantage of that. The abbreviated FHSA.
Maybe as we talk about and bring up each individual policy change or whatever, maybe let's share on whether this is going to help hurt adjusts market conditions anyway. And this one specifically is like a 5-year thing, right? It's mostly geared towards younger people to start saving to purchase a home in 5 years from now. So we're not going to see whether that helps, hurts, doesn't do anything for a few years more.
We should also acknowledge the average. Well, I mean, I don't have the number handy, but the average gift that a first-time buyer is getting towards their down payment from family or parents, for the ones that are fortunate enough to have that. Do you remember the numbers that we heard from mortgage brokers on that? Like, it was astronomical.
So Dustin Woodhouse, I heard him on a podcast recently. He is, I believe, the president of Mortgage Architects. He's the president of one of the Dominion Lending, one of the big mortgage companies. He said the average, and this sounds astronomical to me, but he said the average gift that he saw in 2023 was $300,000. He said some people are getting a lot more money than this, but he's like, this is an era of wealth transfer that we've never seen before he's never seen before in his career, and he's been doing mortgages for a very long time. But yeah, I don't think that's going away.
I'll touch base on two items that happened last year that really, I think, have no impact on the market. One being a residential property flipping rule. Basically, they came up with a rule that if you sell a property within 12 months of purchasing it, and there's a gain, that gain is treated like income, not like a capital gain. So you pay more taxes. The reason I think it has zero impact on the market is because, well, one, there was no real gain this year. And two, when you consider transaction costs and the cost of buying and selling, you need to see a lot of market gain within a 12-month period for this to actually be triggered. There are, of course, some exemptions being if your employment changes or if your family grows. But this was a rule they brought in to just, government to try to collect extra tax dollars when the market's good for flippers.
On that, Jamie, do you, I look at these things and say, like, why was this even a thought? Why was this brought in? How many consumers are you seeing in a regular calendar year that are purchasing a property and selling it within that 12 months? Like, it happens so infrequently.
I think it's purely a political move.
Yeah.
I think it's just a PR. Hey, look at what we did. We're doing one more thing to help the struggling homeowner.
Yeah.
But it doesn't move. That doesn't have a major impact. And neither does the next one I'm talking about. And the next one's ban on foreign buyers. Yeah. They ban foreign buyers for residential purchases. Now, residential properties. Now, just to recap, there was a significant tax before that ban. I believe it was 20%. Yeah,
it started at 15 in 2016, 15%, and that went up to 20% for foreign buyers a few years ago back.
And they, I see the logic behind a foreign buyer tax. We saw the impact of it. We had when was the foreign buyer tax? It was
middle of 2016.
Middle of 2016. We had a listing at that time in Burnaby. And that announcement, well, the implementation of that was horrible. Horrible. It was effective immediately. So any pending contracts, foreign buyer contracts, if they removed subjects and had a closing date a month later, they were impacted by this 15% tax that showed up overnight. But we had a listing that was, a kind of 1950s, 60s, mid-century home in Burnaby. And I think the market value of that home was affected in the neighborhood of $100,000, which was, call it, just under 10% of the value of the home overnight from that announcement. And, granted, there was some areas that got very inflated, Richmond and Burnaby particularly. I can think of some land value, like there's homes on these properties, but land value sales around the Deer Lake area, Burnaby, that haven't been repeated. The prices they went for 2016, 8 years ago, have not come back. We're talking like Buckingham Heights lots going for around 3 million, or land value going for around 3 million. It's not there again. Upper Deer Lake, 50 by 120s, maybe a little larger, like a 55. I remember one instance where one that was just land value went for 198, and that's not there anymore. I mean, that's probably 20% off today. So there were some areas that got significantly inflated, and there was a need for a foreign tax, in my opinion, but like a ban altogether, I think that tax did the job. Your thoughts?
And it's 2 years, right? So what are they going to do at the end of the 2 years? But I agree that the tax hurt maybe the number, or maybe that multiple buyer, that buyer that's trying to park $20 million in Greater Vancouver that was buying 8 properties. maybe it kind of hurts that a little bit. But like most of our business is young families who are moving in and around the Lower Mainland, and we saw very few. Like personally, I only remember one transaction that was actually bought by someone who was not in Canada. And it was affected by that first 2016 15% tax. And we had to move up the closing date to accommodate, to make sure that these guys didn't pay the tax because we were already in a firm contract. But very rarely are we affected or see this type of
what we saw the trickle down effect, really.
Yeah.
You know, we worked with people that were just living here. And we worked with the people that were cashing out of these areas in Vancouver and Richmond and getting astronomically higher prices in certain pockets of Burnaby, Vancouver, and Richmond that were like, oh, I can just move to New Westminster and I can get basically the same home for 40% less.
Yeah.
So, we saw the trickle down effect. It didn't impact our business too much or at all, fortunately. The changes, those were the two that I didn't think moved the ticker at all. There was a couple that have a larger impact. I think the biggest one that stands out to me is the removal of all rental restrictions, which I like. And I know that some people who listen to this might hate me saying that, but there's too many restrictions. There's too many strata councils restricting, one, it's a great way to open up more housing. I feel for certain buildings. I feel for the small stratified buildings, the 8, 12 unit buildings that have people that have been there for 20 years that may have a tenant move in that doesn't care at all. I mean, that's impactful. But as a whole, it's more of a net gain. Like a lot of, in market we work in, New Westminster Quay, New Westminster Fraserview, there's a lot of condos there that when their life changes, they're forced to sell them as opposed to keep them as a rental or as an investment. And we've had many clients over the years that have to take a loss or they're trying to beg strata for a year of hardship to say, hey, can I rent this for a year? And quite frankly, it impacts people too much. And removing long-term, and this is not short-term, but removing long-term rentals across the board, I think was a great move, and it opened up it made a lot of areas more sellable. And also in conjunction with this, they removed the age restriction except for the 55 plus. And in the US, there's a few townhouse complexes that are perfect for families. And those ones had age restrictions, and there's no reason why 55 plus should be in a 2,400 square foot townhouse. I get it for apartments, but I think those were positives. Any thought from you on those?
I think huge positives. Look at the, again, supply and demand problem that we have in Greater Vancouver. It is very significant in the rental market too. I remember posting something for rent previous to this, 2021 summer maybe, and I had 35 people ask, and I thought I posted it quite high in terms of market rent. There is a significantly low supply of rentals, and so this will open it up a little bit. I like that owners get more flexibility. Like, say someone gets a job out of town for 2 years, they're forced to sell the property. They weren't allowed to rent in a lot of stratas in Greater Vancouver, and I just like that owners have a little bit more flexibility.
Totally. And I mean, just touching on that, I mean, rents climbed significantly in 2023. All this high interest rates make owning a home more expensive. There's a limited supply of homes in Greater Vancouver and BC as a whole, and probably Canada as a whole. And rents climbed a lot. So, this is a way to help mitigate that a touch. It probably has a sliver of an impact. But I think this was a year that, one of the big headlines of this year was renting got more expensive. And you know what? The cost of a mortgage did too. So I don't know if a variable rate mortgage might have got maybe marginally more expensive than the market rents. But it is a year where we've seen more landlords sell their properties because they're significantly under market rents. Maybe their payments have gone up, and the values were still relatively close to peak pricing. So the prices remained pretty high. Any comment on rents, Denny? No.
I don't think it's going anywhere. It's the problem. There's not enough supply. I think with higher interest rates, a lot of people are electing to continue renting that would like to buy, and it's a problem. Local governments are making a big push towards purpose-built rentals. It just takes a significant amount of time to build that supply up, and I think we're quite a ways behind in terms of rentals. and I don't see that backtracking much.
I think this is, there's some savvy renters that recognize the value of a purpose-built rental now. If you're renting a property from a regular person, that individual may choose to sell it at any time. But if you're in a purpose-built rental, you're likely going to stay there as long as you want. But yeah, rental, I think that was the biggest, on a couple fronts. So the allowing rentals everywhere, and also the rental rates climbing. That was big news this year.
Good change. Very rarely are we very complimentary of adjustments that happen around real estate in Greater Vancouver, but this is a really good one.
That one got a golf clap.
Yeah.
3-day rescission period, cooling off period. That was January 1st last year effective. And what impact? I mean, it makes sense, but what's your opinion on it now?
I would say this is the one that the real estate industry was the most fired up about. There was a lot of people really upset about this, that it wasn't very, that people bringing this policy in don't really understand how a real estate transaction works. And I think that was my initial reaction too. But looking back at the year of 2023, it literally did nothing. There was no adjustment. I think for our team specifically, I could probably count maybe 3 to 4 times that it was actually used.
Mm-hmm.
And one time it was used fairly, I'd say disingenuously, but the other few times that I can think of, it was like, a situation changed in that type of period. It was kind of a fluke kind of situation that had actually really helped the consumer. But I think we feel this one a lot more when we get back to a really active market, and when we see multiple offers on a lot of listings again. We'll see it be used more often when market values are climbing or a little bit different than this year. But this year was a year that was quite slow. A lot of listings were on market more than a week, and we're not getting multiple offers. And so it just wasn't really used. It wasn't
the market for this policy change.
No.
And let's acknowledge that there's a lot of people that made rush decisions, and we've had when Vancouver gets hot, it gets hot, and you have people spending $2 million subject free, without inspection, without appraisal, taking a huge risk. And this 3-day cooling off rescission period is to help mitigate that at a marginal fee.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Denny?
I
think I want to touch on...
Let's maybe chat density right at the end, just so that we can kind of roll into the next podcast where we'll explain it and go into a lot more detail. But the last one I have on my list is that we haven't felt yet, because it really comes into effect in the spring this year, but is the Airbnb restrictions.
Absolutely. I mean... You have one.
Luckily in an Airbnb community, so a resort community. But I'd say I heard whispers of some type of Airbnb restriction throughout BC coming. I just didn't know it was going to be this blanketed. And I think it'll hurt community. Like, we've done podcasts on this, but I think it will hurt a few communities quite significantly. And I don't know if that means market value goes down significantly for the style of condos. I'm thinking like Kelowna, Penticton, but it probably will increase supply. But through Greater Vancouver, there was just it's not a huge number of Airbnbs that are going to be taken away. That I just don't really see it doing a ton long term for real estate prices or real estate supply.
No, I feel for certain homeowners and people in Kelowna. I think that's a market that's getting devastated by that news, or it's impacting a few people really bad.
Yeah.
In our markets, Tri-Cities, Burnaby New West, Vancouver, North Shore, aside from downtown, there's a few buildings that allowed it that won't. So it does impact a few areas downtown, but our business, our areas that we focus on, it has virtually no impact. And it is a blanketed rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think this will last, or do you think there will be changes along the way? For example, a Kelowna, something like that.
I'd hope, future governments look at it, and it's it's hard to say, Denny. Is it a good political move for some? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know what's going to get reversed. there's been a lot of things added on in the last few years.
Yeah.
Hard to say what's going to get reversed.
Let's say, I'll give you this example. Let's say you own a 2-bedroom condo in Kelowna, just off the water. You've been Airbnb-ing it for the last 4 years. Are you putting a long-term tenant in there in the hopes that Airbnb will be adjusted in a couple of years and you can Airbnb it again? Or are you unloading that asset?
I think the argument to put a long-term tenant in there is to wait till a better market, but not wait for the hopes of it getting reversed.
Yeah.
The sad thing is when, COVID hit 2020, these Sunshine Coast, these Okanagan, these areas that, in a work from home environment became more desirable, Airbnb rates shot up, and some people looked at that as a business opportunity, and they took a lot of risk and invested in properties in these areas that had high Airbnb rates for the cost of owning a home. So, the Sunshine Coast, as an example, went up. Probably one of the most, it went up the most as a percentage, not the most period, but it was one of the areas that went up the highest. So, a home that, once was $1 million may have been moved up to high ones, like 1.6, 1.8 at some point in time. And people that were buying those had an Airbnb angle. And then now the market's shifted. It's been more of an urban trend. Those recreation properties, those smaller communities are coming off more, and they're taking a huge financial impact. So, it's a small percentage of people that are getting impacted a lot. And, I feel for them, because for most of us, it doesn't do a thing. Whistler's exempt. There's areas that are exempt. But if Whistler's exempt, I think Kelowna waterfront should be, or at least there should be some exception areas where there's a high density of Airbnbs because the prices are high.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Kelowna is the one that I talk about all the time and think about all the time is these developments were specifically marketed as Airbnb-able, right? So to change that a couple years later, and I know the people who are making legislation don't really care what had happened in the past, but it just seems it seems wrong to market something. And I mean, developers weren't doing anything incorrectly because at the time it was very legal. But hey, come buy this. These are Airbnb numbers. This is what the neighborhood did last year or in the past couple of years. Good investment at these prices. Here you go. And then, unfortunately, a couple of years later, sorry, you can't do that anymore.
Nope. Maybe to finish off the announcement in the fall, or maybe it was the end of summer for big, David Eby, the big density announcement. No more single family zoning, transit-oriented development areas, towers around SkyTrain stations. We're going to do another podcast on that topic and dig into it more. But I think it's not effective today. It's not a 2023 thing. It's a 2023 announcement. And it's a big move. And I think there's a lot of positive that's going to come from it. I think there's going to be people that are going to be upset when they see a fourplex show up next door. I think they're taking steps to actually increase the housing supply at a quicker rate than they have had a track record of doing, which is a positive. But I also don't think you're going to see streets change overnight. So, there's going to be a few people that, we're going to dig into it. I think I'd suggest before I go on the rant, watch for our next episode on talking about this density push. But Denny, any closing comments on density?
It's exciting. We've been talking about this for a long, long time of working with municipalities, getting building permits, the process of going through all of that. It just takes too long, and our city is getting farther and farther and farther behind. So some sort of drastic change was needed. Is this exactly the right move? Time will tell. We don't know. But I think it's a step in the right direction because the moral of the story is Greater Vancouver needs more density. Otherwise, pricing is just going to keep going and going and going. We need more doors for people to live in. We need more, 2 and 3 bedroom style townhouse looking things for young families with dogs and kids. We don't have enough of it. And I think this is a move in the right direction.
It is exciting for so many reasons. I can't wait to talk about. That's it. Thanks for making it this far in the podcast. If you want to reach out to Denny directly, you can reach out to Denny, DENNY at gdrealestate.ca or James at gdrealestate.ca or Google us or find us on social media. We'd love to hear from you.